While the pandemic has certainly been tough, economically, socially, and from a health and safety perspective, one consequence of more people working from home is the acceleration of the evolution of the office. I'm really excited today to be joined by my colleague, DeJeana Chappell, EY's National Workplace Leader and a Senior Manager within EY's Corporate Real Estate Practice. DeJeana specializes in working with PE-backed companies as they reimagine their office purpose and footprint. DeJeana, thanks so much for joining us today.
So glad to be here. Thanks, Winna.
You've been working on the future of work and the purpose of the office well before COVID-19 hit. Can you maybe explain how the workplace was both perceived and used pre-pandemic?
Yeah, obviously the pandemic has accelerated a lot of these conversations, but these were conversations that we were having way before COVID-19 existed. But the interesting thing is that a lot of even thinking about the office occupancy, so meaning that how many people come into the office every day, how many seats do you have for every person, the utilization levels are pretty low, actually averaging around 40% sort of, across the board, across sectors, across industries. And I think that's a really surprising fact because I think a lot of the clients that I work with think that, oh, our people are here every day, or at least they were pre-pandemic. They're here every day. We need this space. We need all of this, square footage. But when you look at the data and sort of peel back the veil, you see that actually not even half of your people are there on a day-to-day average over the course of a year or multi-year. And so that's really been something that before COVID was, we were helping clients really understand that. There are some industries that might have on average higher utilization. So maybe like insurance or, heavily engineering based companies that you really do need to be on site for that work and for it to be productive. But a lot of the clients, pre-pandemic were more traditional, one seat for every person. You come into the office every day and that was sort of the expectation of the role and you have a seat and it's assigned to you. And so some, although were thinking flexibly before, so thinking about the value of flexibility for their workers. But you did have a lot of sort of drastic opinions sort of on both sides of the coin that we need people here every day. Or the other side of the coin is we really want to put flexibility and sort of the control into the hands of our employees. So there were some like, professional services like EY as an example. We before the pandemic, we were very flexible. Depending on the level in the organization, you may or may not have had an assigned seat. You may not have had an assigned office. You may not have had a seat at all. So there are, professional services and some industries that were a little bit more progressive before the pandemic. And the last thing I'd say is just sort of the historical perception, which has been completely turned on its head now because of the pandemic. But the historical perception was you have to be seen to be perceived as working, or you have to be seen to be perceived as productive. And obviously, the pandemic has really, really, pushed the envelope on a lot of people's perceptions around that. And I think for the better.
Now that we're in the, almost post-pandemic world, based on the discussions that you've been having with PE-backed companies and companies broadly, what are some of the top concerns or considerations that leaders are having to think about or they're worried about as they think about their strategy of bringing their employees back to the workplace?
Health and safety is still a concern, and not, I think, only as of what I heard of maybe this week, maybe 20% of the population, US population, has been vaccinated. So there's still a long way to go. And so in thinking about, the cleaning protocols in the office and air filtration and even circulation and how you move through space, how many people do you pass to get to the restroom, as an example? How many people do you pass to get out through the exits? And then elevators. So for those who are in buildings, multi-floor buildings, and what's the elevator protocol, and how many people in the elevator, and sort of are there shifts to get in and get out. So a lot of our clients are thinking through that process from a health and safety perspective. But hopefully as clients decide to come back to the office, some are waiting for a little bit more progression and with the vaccine and sort of that to sort of move faster and quicker before they bring people back. But a lot of the clients I'm working with are, and this is a shifting timetable, but they're sort of targeting summer of 2021, some are fall 2021, and some are just sort of wait and see still. So that's one concern. I'd say another concern, obviously, is cost savings. So in thinking about the different levers when it comes to real estate, so more of the cost savings on the space. So a lot of our clients were sitting with empty buildings, at least those who had a heavy corporate office footprint. definitely those industries that have, more of an essential service or essential staff need, or, manufacturing, industrial, retail, some of those, they weren't impacted as much around this, or they won't really have as much of an opportunity from a real estate perspective in reducing at least that footprint. But on the corporate office side, our clients are saying, hey, our buildings have been sitting primarily empty, or at least, 20% capacity over the last 12 months. So we can really, push the envelope on this. But there is still concern about which levers to pull when it comes to the cost savings piece on the real estate. Do we optimize our portfolio and maybe release some of the leases we have that are coming up for expiration? Or do we consider virtual, flexibility programs that will allow us to give up more space, maybe reduce some of our square footage, even if they don't fully exit? And then sort of thinking about the need for capital expenditures moving forward. And so, what's sort of the roadmap, and can they reduce the spend in some of those buildings that they may or may not stay in? So those are all the factors lumping into the cost savings piece. I think one other concern I'll just touch on is the culture piece. So I've spoken to a lot of clients and sort of saying, like, what's been the impact on your culture? I do want to say, just this week, EY's People Advisory Services team, they commissioned a survey called to the 2021 Work Reimagined Employee Survey. So it was just released this month, and it's like 16,000 employees that responded to the survey across 16 countries, even had like 24 demographic cuts. So it was a really robust survey that our PAS team did. And some of the interesting stats, I'll just sort of say three. One was that 48% of employees believe their company culture has changed for the better since the pandemic, which is nearly half of those 16,000 respondents said it's actually changed for the better. Another stat was that 66% agree that productivity for their job can be accurately measured. A lot of clients say, like, hey, we can't measure productivity in a remote working environment. Well, hey, we've had 12 months for you to try it out and see. And 66 of those respondents say that actually my job can be measured pretty effectively, irrelevant of, not impacted by where I am. So, and then the last one was 54% of employees said that they are likely to quit if they're not offered flexibility. So that's over half of employees say, if I don't have the option of flexibility, then I'm ready to walk. And the interesting factor to that is that 2 times more likely for millennials than for baby boomers to quit. So even for, our clients with younger populations, there's more likeliness to quit if they don't offer that long-term flexibility. So those are definitely a lot of the big concerns, Winna, to your point.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So a couple of things that struck me. So one thing that you mentioned was, as companies think about bringing the employees back into the office space, 20% of the country is vaccinated. At what point in time is it safe for people to come in? Curious, when you're having these conversations with companies, are they thinking of the vaccine as the point where once everyone's vaccinated, or a good proportion, we can bring people back in and we don't have to change anything in the workplace? Or are they saying we have to change everything in the workplace because even if people are vaccinated, we need to make the workplace safe no matter what, and for whoever comes back? I'm curious as how they're approaching it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of differing opinions. One client I worked with, starting in June of 2020 through December of 2020, so a pretty long-term engagement where they were really wrestling with this question. If this is a post-pandemic, return to work and work reimagined sort of initiative, then how much will the vaccine play a part in this? And for them, their concern was more of that we want to go back to normal. We want everyone to come back in. We don't really want to provide flexibility in a real sort of tangible way. We really want everyone back in the office, not in a bad way, but more of like, this is our culture. We're like a family culture, where they used to say we're a hugging culture. So they really wanted to sort of go back to the way things were, and the fact that I just want everyone here. The CEO just really wanted everyone in the office. So that's sort of one direction and sort of sentiment I hear. The other sentiment is, yeah, let's use this pandemic and all the learnings around remote work and all the learnings around, like, technology, and how we've been able to use video and all these other tools to really elevate our employee experience. And let's keep going. Like, let's keep investing in those areas. Let's rethink our office, because we don't really need everyone here. We probably won't bring everyone back because we don't need to, or we'll give flexibility in a way that's different than what we had before. So let's keep that sort of ball moving. There's already momentum that's been built, so let's keep it going. So I don't know if that answered your question, Winna, but I feel like it's just the culture impact here is really so important. It's just some companies feel like, hey, we can keep this going, and others say, no, we want to try to sort of somehow hold on to the past because it worked well for us as a culture.
Yeah, and I guess there's also the balance of, there is an opportunity to save cost and gain efficiencies by reducing your office space. So there are choices, as you say, there's a balance between maintaining culture and, the other side being the cost savings around reduced office space, and also market perception. How do you convey to your employees that you're a welcoming environment, but at the same time, you also trust your employees, if you will, to be productive while they're not physically present. So it's balancing all of these different facts and, I guess, perception, if you will, and certainly in the race to attract talent, that's going to be really important. So as you advise companies in, helping them make these decisions, how are you helping them balance the cost savings that can be, I guess, supported by data-driven insights with more intangible kind of human connection that is maybe harder to measure, although, as you said, the PAS survey that recently came out certainly gives indications as to the flexibility that people have come to enjoy over the last year.
A lot of the work that I'm doing now, alongside people advisory services, is looking at the workforce piece, and specifically, sort of, what are the personas of your employee set? So, what are the different work profiles? What are the different job roles? And what do those job roles need to be successful? And how many of those job roles could really be work from anywhere or location agnostic? And then which of those job roles really need to be tied to a site? And there's different reasons why. It could be access to equipment, specialty equipment. It could be, just these particular job roles really have a heavy amount of collaboration, as an example, where they really need to be in the office to have in-person sort of brainstorming, collaboration. Yes, there's a lot of technology that can sort of supplement that, but still, there's still a big case to be made for those roles to be in the office. And so we're starting to build out a persona framework for our clients to say, these are your employees, these are their different personas, this is a head count within each of those personas. And then not only that, but what will drive that persona to the office, and what's the sort of future state on-site need? Is it 1 to 2 days a week? Is it 3 to 4? Is it 5 days a week? And as you start to build out those different scenarios for our clients, we start to roll up an opportunity for them to say that, looking across your portfolio, looking across your personas, we recommend X reduction in real estate to support the future state persona needs. Or maybe it's heavier in one geography, maybe where the headquarters is, or maybe one of their larger regional offices, to say, we think you should stay in that space. You might need to expand, or maybe you can contract. And then these other locations you could potentially exit, depending on what your people and talent strategy is. And so it's definitely sort of a cross-functional approach, and it ties in some of those more intangible elements. And I think the other thing I'd say is not one size fits all. So what you do, even for your US headquarters, as an example, may not work in, APAC or EMEA or some other, geographies, for the same company. And, even what you do regionally in the US for, let's say one site in New York may be very different than what you do for a site in Houston, as an example. And so those elements are really important to pull into the analysis. And then I guess the last thing I'd say is just employee preference. And so really knowing who your employees are and taking the time and the effort to actually survey them and understand, what's top of mind for your employees, and then how to sort of roll that in, and even like the leadership insights as well, which is sort of a different sort of constituency, as to how do those insights roll in, from the business leader perspective, to say, this would work really well for our business, or this won't work well, for X, Y, and Z reasons. And so those are some of the intangible sort of inputs to this process that are really critical and sometimes overlooked. So we always say, that's where you should start, and then start talking about the portfolio impacts of that.
So this sounds less of a scientific analysis and more like an art form, if you will, in terms of really trying to marry up the data with the human element, right? And you can't separate the two, because if you make a decision purely on the numbers, if you will, you're probably not going to get an answer that resonates with your employees. And then you stand to lose touch with, or lose them, if you will, in that equation. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair.
Do you think there'll be a reduction in prime office space for private equity headquarters or global conglomerates in favor of either offices with smaller footprints, or maybe an increase in satellite offices outside the more traditional expensive locations, such as the New Yorks and the San Franciscos, the Londons? Are you seeing any trends happening in that?
Oh yeah, a lot, and it's always changing. Every week there's a new announcement. But a lot of the clients and companies that I'm working with are rethinking their sort of network or fabric of locations. So maybe if they were in a sort of a high cost market but had a lot of access to talent, that was their strategy pre-pandemic. But now, particularly, let's say a technology sector as an example, where you're seeing a lot of movement, out of Silicon Valley, movement to Austin, movement to Houston, movement to even like Las Vegas, and Denver, and sort of movement outside of Silicon Valley, which was like, for the most part, a lot of technology companies were centered there. Just as an example, not to say every company is moving out, but we have seen a lot of fluctuation and a lot of movement outside of those like sort of high cost areas, particularly for those companies that are saying, hey, we're going to make a bet, on our talent, and say, let's recruit talent from everywhere and anywhere, and let's just find the right people. They don't necessarily have to be in the right location. And so if they're making those decisions on the workforce side of the house, then when it comes to the real estate, then they're definitely saying, well, we have the flexibility to make some moves, and sort of consolidate. I'm working with one client now that they're planning to give employees the option to relocate to Austin out of Santa Clara. And so they're sort of working through that process now, and it's an opt-in. So they don't know how many people will raise their hand, but as a downstream impact of that, they are planning to consolidate some of their real estate in the Santa Clara area. So this is exact sort of specific example of that. But we're seeing it across the board, and also, the network or fabric that I spoke to. They're thinking about how big does a headquarters need to be, or can we have sort of different multiple headquarters, smaller headquarters, or centers of excellence across our portfolio, where it's not sort of like one now big hub, but now we have small little spokes that are coming off, that are becoming their own sort of ecosystem within our fabric or within our portfolio. And not just that, but they're also considering pulling in co-working sites as an option, or even client sites for heavily sales focused organizations, where a lot of their employees were out at client sites anyway, or maybe out at hospitals as an example, in med tech or any other industry where they don't really need dedicated space for those employees that are always on the road. And so they're rethinking those options as well. And then home, of course, now is following the pandemic, is even more of a viable option. So your home could be your home base, and then you only go to the office for a few times a week, or maybe a couple times a month. And so they're rethinking sort of the fabric and the movement across their portfolio, and pulling in talent strategy to support some of those decisions.
we're going to see, and what I'm hearing from you is that we're going to see offices of the future developing that are very different to what we would have imagined the norm to be even 12 months ago.
Yeah, and something we haven't spoken much about is, what's happening with families, right? And obviously, schools we're hoping will be back in session this fall, but who knows? None of us really know exactly what the timeline will be. But what we do know, what some of the research has shown, is that women have been disproportionately impacted by all of this. And so, either trying to move jobs and sort of relocate, or, with some of the heavier childcare needs that they have within the household. And so, that's something also, as our clients are thinking about, talent strategy and sort of opening up flexibility, it's also going, I think, open up opportunities for those who might have been disproportionately impacted during the pandemic, because they didn't have sort of the support and structure in place, because a lot of our clients were sort of scrambling to create that. But with sort of, hopefully post-vaccine, which will hopefully be soon, I'm hoping that we'll start to see these opportunities open up for long-term flexibility and support and sort of wellness programs that will be enabled across our organizations, our client organizations. And we're seeing a whole lot of movement in, stipends and reimbursement opportunities. Even at EY, we now have what we call like a wellness stipend, right? And so there's a lot of things that could sort of fall into those categories, whether it's you want a new Peloton, or you want, some, delivery service for meals. It's great. Like, so we're seeing companies rethink those programs. And I think to your earlier question, like what's here to stay, I really think that will be here to stay, even in a post-vaccine world.
I think there's been a lot of focus on, the negative impacts of COVID, and there clearly have been so many. But coming out the other side of it, there are some positives. There are outcomes and influences where we're more focused on the individual and the flexibility that's opening up for people, and the opportunities. I mean, clearly it's been a very difficult period, and there's still difficult times to come, but hopefully there's some learnings, and there'll be opportunity for all of us to have a better workplace experience, if you will, going forward. So it'll be very interesting to see how it evolves, both here at EY and with our private equity companies, and more broadly in the ecosystem. So DeJeana, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Very, very interesting, and very much looking forward to seeing how the Office of the Future evolves over the coming months and years.
Thanks for having me, and I'm excited about it too. I'll be front row and following it as well. So thank you, Winna.
Thank you so much.